Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're going to talk about the wartime era that we've been in. Okay, so in this video, I want to help bring maybe a different perspective into the equation about what we're all going through collectively worldwide. When I really psychically investigate this whole World War III energy, what I've found and what I truly believe is that we've already been in World War III, that since the early 1900s, the start of World War One, the mid 1900s with World War Two, I feel like we're already here in World War Three. We've just been in these continuous cycles of war for many, many years now. And warfare looks very different than it once used to look like, um, although very similar, with control and fear and pain that is inflicted upon the people. However, something that I find very interesting about modern warfare is it's more silent. So we're going to go through from the 1900s and begin to kind of psychically investigate or look from a higher perspective at different forms of warfare that are more silent so that we can all be more aware of how the collective is essentially being manipulated through this fear tactic, through this means of control and imposing of our human rights that it can look violent. It can look like bombings and guns and terror, but it also is directly affected to our health and our mental health and our body state. Warfare is a direct attack on our divinity, on our soul, on our spirit. And so if we have awareness that, we've already kind of been in a war, it may help you to find peace. It may help you to realize you were born into centuries of war. We were born into times where we're really fighting to reclaim our power and peace. I want to also start by saying that there is a dual nature to our existence in this earth realm. So all of this pain, all of this violence, all of this war, I believe is essentially the fuel that creates the peace. So all of this that we're going through, although it's turbulent, it's emotionally draining, it's exhausting, it's scary at times, I believe that it's bringing us to a place of more unity consciousness, to more originality and authenticity that we're allowed to walk in, that we're able to find from within us and not just have to go into a system that is this way or that way or try to fit into someone else's ideology or theology. So we're moving more towards a place of not only peace but reclaiming of our authenticity and intuitive power, our soul's nature. And I think that it's important to share that each and every person on the the whole collective web, if you think of like a whole spider web connecting each and every one of us all around the globe, and one ripple like wave will influence other waves, right? So this is an example of how your prayer into the field can help the whole. You getting into your higher heart and praying from this place for world peace will bring world peace. And we need all of us to be on this prayer wave. We need all of us to be on this thought wave and belief system of unity versus the separation that we see all of us. And so a lot of the separation mindset is programmed in us and through us. It starts in our mother's wombs of what she's consuming, what she's watching, how her senses are interacting with the energetic world. So we've been in this type of war for so long, and so see hope in the times that we're in, that we are moving towards a trajectory of seeing through the lies, seeing through the hidden to see the higher truth. Okay, so modern warfare, what I truly believe is really warfare. So I have a little bit of information to share with everyone, uh, and just sharing some information with everyone. Um, let's go back to the early 1900s. So we see the start of World War One around 1914. and the U.S. Congress entered into the war with Germany in 1917. In 1939, we had World War II, and then the U.S. entered with the attack of Pearl Harbor in 1941. Okay, so what's really interesting about when there is like a physical war with violence and bombing and bloodshed, you could say, what comes right after that is biological warfare, which is biological warfare and chemical warfare. They actually are chemical warfare falls under the biological warfare. So when you think of like how the bombs are created, that's chemical warfare. Um, Simply, it gets deeper than just bombs. Um, but what we can see systemically is like the start of World War One in 1914. What happens right after that? One of the more modern first global pandemics. Let's bring this and fast forward to 2017. I felt a shift. Many people felt a shift. Most of us stepped into a place of awakening on purpose. It was a trigger, a door opening to um, us reclaiming that peace. But it was painful. So many of us began our awakening journeys on a deeper level. If you've awakened prior to 2017, you had probably what I would say like a more of a grand finale awakening or a great awakening around that time. So what happened right after 2017? Okay, so another global pandemic. Do you see a trend? This is what I mean about wars. And so one of the first things I want to talk about is eugenics. I feel that this is what modern day warfare looks like is eugenics. We see the rise of this in the 1900s. Um, and I think that Nazi Germany is most known or popular for eugenics because they were obsessed with it. They were obsessed with controlling the gene and depopulating the planet, but more specifically, genocide of people of color, specifically marginalized groups of people, indigenous people. They were obsessed with it. They were obsessed with preserving their genes and being able to manipulate the embryo so that we have this perfect person. Not a perfect person, but really a person that will comply to whatever it is that they need done through people and humanity. So we can see from continent to continent where, starting in the early 1900s, this warfare of eugenics has been played out on people. Let's start in North America. I think that it is more known now as we are reclaiming our history, true history, not what the schools have taught us. We've had to find that ourselves, right? But it is more common knowledge these days that there was forced sterilizations of Black women, Native Americans, Latinas, people with disabilities, and the poor, starting in the early 1900s to the 70s. Many were sterilized. Over 60,000 people were sterilized under state eugenics law. Okay. We think of the famous Tuskegee syphilis study, 1932 to 72. The U.S. Public Health Service withheld treatment from over 600 Black men with syphilis to study the disease's progression. Okay. Native American sterilizations that took place through the 60s, 70s, an estimated 25 to 50% of Native American women were sterilized without informed consent through the Indian Health Service. So let's take a pause. Who's doing this? Warfare, the government, the military. Okay. So this is what we see that has bled into the chemical warfare with our food, with our beauty products. The same companies that are doing this experimentation own these chemicals that make the bombs and that we put on in our mascara and on our skin and in the food we eat. And we have I would say, a huge problem with infertility today. Many struggle to conceive. As a psychic, I know this very well, as many women and men share that there is a deep longing and grief over their inability to conceive. I think it goes a lot deeper than just these souls not wanting to sign on during warfare. I think that it has a lot to do with all of the chemicals and biological war we're exposed to every day that we have become normalized to, and it's desensitized, so we don't realize we're in this warfare over our wombs, and then over reproductive organs for both men and women. We've been in this warfare, and it leads to needing the system to help us conceive, which where we have this IVF, and not to demonize IVF or anything, but let's just be real about the agendas of it, that started it. I think there is a guise that it wants to help women conceive and men start families. I think there was a deeper underlying underlying meaning to IVF is really rooted in eugenics. We can see sterilization of, in Canada, the Alberta British Columbia Eugenics Board, 1928 to 72, where thousands, especially Indigenous women, were labeled mentally unfit and were forcibly sterilized. Okay, we've seen this in Greenland. What this system does is you know, they will tell these women that they're not fit enough to be a parent. They're mentally unwell. And usually it's people that are Indigenous that have spiritual practices against the patriarchy, that aren't with the Christianity and the Catholicism. So I'll take a pause here. Who's running all of this? I think that a very small percent of elites, and a lot of them are white men, that are in control and have been of the modern day warfare, and they're obsessed with preserving their power and having slaves, humanity, underneath them. And so I feel that they do this through the modern warfare that we see by trying to get control of the womb, trying to get control of reproduction on the planet, whether they want to complete genocide or take genes from a race and mix with other races. They are obsessed with it. And what this does to the woman, to the human, is it really detaches her from her body and spirit. It's a form of colonization, of warfare that has been pushed on women of color and men for so long, decades. Okay, and we can think of the residential school experiments in Canada, where Indigenous children were subject to nutritional and medical experiments in church-run schools. This is where we have, the elites in the Vatican that have control of this modern day warfare over all of us. Then it ties into the prison systems, and it's all interconnected, where um, we see experimentation on prison men and women. And by statistics, usually this is people of color, where there were, studies by the military of in the United States where prisoners were paid $1 to be medically experimented on with this virus and bacteria, this warfare. So if we think of biological warfare, it usually is like about three categories: viruses, bacteria, and chemical warfare. This is what's studied. New Mexico, okay? In other areas in the United States, that's New Mexico is key. But this is what they do because they are obsessed with viruses and bacteria, because if they can do this type of warfare, it's very silent. You don't have to go and bring the tanks out into the streets. You don't have to bomb infrastructure. You don't have to cause the conflict. It's very silent. And I think it's one of the biggest modern warfare tools that we see is these diseases that are man-made. And I think of cancer. How are we not questioning that we're in World War III? How many individuals do you know that have had cancer? Okay, and maybe you've had cancer. It's modern day warfare that's very common. We've been normalized to it and desensitized to it. But it really started with experimentation on people, people of color, historically and systemically throughout time. What's the first thing that you do when you get into the military? You get vaccinated, right? Okay, so this is what they do. They experiment on us and through us, and they use this military complex and the police force and all of these protective services that could do good to control and act out these, modern day warfare acts of genocide and making people very ill. In South America and Peru, we see forced sterilization in the 90s under President Alberto Fujimori. Over 270,000 sterilizations were conducted, primarily targeting indigenous Quechua-speaking women, often without consent, as part of a national family planning campaign. In Brazil, the fadeless reproductive control of the 20th century, where sterilizations and contraception was pushed on poor Black and Indigenous communities under the guise of population control. Here we go, back to Europe and Germany. So the Nazi eugenics was probably one of the biggest, most popular movements that many, if you didn't know, after Nazi Germany, ended, a lot of these eugenic scientists came to the United States and began to work for the military and who controls all of these viruses, bacteria, and chemical warfare. So they were put into these high places in America and around the world to carry out this elite, small percent program of modern day warfare that's very silent. So the Nazis sterilized over 400,000 people, probably a lot more, under the 1933 law for the prevention of hereditary diseased offspring. Later, hundreds of thousands, including the disabled Roma Jews and others, were killed under the T4 euthanasia program. So a lot of us can see clearly that there's a connection between Donald Trump and Nazi Germany and these scientists. One of the first things that I had picked up psychically when he got into office was like, I smell a Nazi scientist. There's going to be pandemics. There's going to be euthanasia. There's going to be a rise of cancers, more infertility, because that's what they do. That's how they conduct warfare in a civilized society. If they don't see the society as civilized, or up to their standards, like they see Gaza and what they're doing in Sudan and Iran and countries like this, they will just bomb. They will literally bring that violent warfare out without any care in the world. Okay, so Donald Trump is huge on this euthanasia program as we see states now getting more into euthanizing prisoners. And we see also with this presidential campaign the increase of private prisons. And we see the increase of these modern day concentration camps and deportation centers. This is what they do because in there, we can't, with the air, let's talk about biological warfare, we can't really see often what's in the air. It's silent, but we breathe it in, and all of a sudden we've contracted something, a disease. It goes deeper than just viruses and bacteria. Let's talk about, where I'm from. Grew up in Western New York, and a lot of the older homes had lead in the paint. So a lot of the manufacturers of homes and schools and prisons are all like contracted under with the same chemicals that make these homes and properties by the military complex, by 3M with these forever chemicals. They're all interconnected. And the air we breathe, that's something that's very commonly known. Like in certain homes you move, you start getting a disease from the mold or the paint or the chemicals in the formaldehyde and the insulation. That's very commonly known. But in these prisons and in these concentration camps and deportation centers, I bet your bottom dollar they're running these type of experimentations more silently on people. And then they go out and they spread these diseases with time, as they're, again, obsessed with these experiments. But euthanasia is where I was at, is that they just want to provoke fear and control and energy harvest the soul and the mind of humans for their own agendas. Um, you know, it's prisons are to me one of the biggest forms of warfare on the planet. Imagine if we were to heal people that are criminals, help people heal, maybe exile them on an island, still give them freedom, but not allow them in our society. What if we had different forms of punishment that don't keep us in this almost like karmic loop of torture, pain, and resentment, hate, fear, crime? What if we actually tried to solve the crime, you know, problem instead of just punishing? instead of just torturing, instead of just keeping people in cages. You know, I think that's why we have more of the violent warfare, more of the violence on streets, the more of the criminals. I think that all of that fuels more and more of it. I don't think it solves any problem. We can see in Sweden, the eugenics program of 1934 to 75, over 60,000 people, mainly labeled women, were labeled unfit or with disabilities, were sterilized. Consent was coerced or uninformed. This is where, if you watch my video on the future of STEM, I explain that I see these doctors, nurses, therapists, military, police, all of these like noblemen are going to be they're going to be forced to do corruption, and if not, they don't have their jobs. That's what I see. And so that'll lead to a movement of robotics in the place of humans, for the military, police force, the doctors and nurses, our healthcare, all of that. It's going to get so bad that people wake up and they say, you know what, I'm not subscribed to this anymore. I'm out. And that will open the door to robotics taking over all of these positions in STEM. Okay. And there's a momentum towards that I don't think can be stopped. But I think that we should continue to study STEM, but open up our own organizations, open up corporations and businesses outside of what's controlled through the system, so that we overpower these systems. We don't give our power away anymore to these systems that are corrupt and they're failing. I think that the collective consciousness has shifted past like seeing going into the military, the police force is cool or noble or the right thing to do or society approves of it. We're like, we don't want this. Mainly because we're watching in real time the destruction of homes, people, the genocide of people, modern day warfare of using drones and gases and chemical warfare on people. We say that's corrupt. I don't want to be part of it. So our collective consciousness is shifting past it. And so I'll say again, get into these fields of STEM, but just know you're going to have to sell your soul if you want a job with these corporations, because this is the agenda. It's warfare. In France, the colonial psychology, psychiatry, and eugenics in the 20th century, psychiatric and eugenic ideas were used to justify racism and experimentation on colonized Algerians. In Africa, South Africa, apartheid medical experiments under the apartheid regime, Black South Africans were subject to unethical research and denied reproductive autonomy. There were reports of birth control being administered without consent in clinics. I myself had a horrible experience with birth control for maybe 3 years, where I was on the pill, and then I tried the shot, and then I tried the NuvaRing. And comes to find out, there's a lot of class action lawsuits these days against these Depo and NuvaRing and birth control pills, because many women get cancers. Many women have, infertility from these these tools. And that's where it's just like everything in this day is like what's up is down and down is up, because birth control can be a right, it can be a privilege, but we have to be honest that a lot of this is to regulate the hormones of the body outside of you, to make the man more robotic, to have us in sync to a pill, not the moon or the planets, the natural rhythm of our bodies, which will impact your pineal gland, your intuition, your clarity, your connection to your soul, not just your reproductive organs. So it goes very deep. This whole birth control thing. I struggled with cysts after I got off of birth control, and then the doctor said, here's birth control to treat the cysts. So I had to put my healing journey in my own hands. And when I speak to a lot of my friends and other women, they also had extreme mental health imbalances after birth control. Getting off for years, it took a while to kind of reclaim that natural homeostasis of the body after birth control. Why? Is because of this is what modern warfare looks like. Okay, they're trying to control us and reproduction and genocide of people. Project Coast in the 80s, a top secret apartheid era chemical and biological weapons program, allegedly experimented with contraceptions and poisons on Black populations. Then in German Southwest Africa, The Hirio and Nama genocide of 1904 to '08, German forces conducted medical experiments on surviving prisoners after genocidal campaigns that killed tens of thousands, considered a precursor to Nazi ideology. In Asia and Japan, the Eugenics Protection Law of 1948 to 96, over 16,000 people were forcibly sterilized, often due to disabilities or mental illnesses. All of this just reminds me of like Trump mocking people with disabilities, and he's part of that. He doesn't believe they should exist or have rights. The law remained until 1996, and survivors began recently to receive reparations only in recent years. In China, the one-child policy, enforced with co coercion, including forced abortions, sterilizations, especially targeting rural and ethnic minority populations. The Uyghur reproductive suppression in 2010s to present time, reports indicate forced sterilization, birth control, and abortions used as tools of demographic control in Xinjiang, excuse me. India, emergency sterilization campaign of 1975 to 77 under Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. Millions of men, mostly poor and lower caste, were coerced into sterilization during population control and campaigns. Now, I've talked a lot about women and birth control, but there is also an attack on men. Um, let's talk about one of the worst places on earth, maybe Afghanistan, where they've got this war on men and boys, where they will make a lot of these boys dance for these other men, and they rape and they have sex with young children, young boys. All of this is a form of control because if this agenda on the masculine right now is the patriarchy falls. If these systems can control men, they can make them soldiers. If they can control the men and disempower them, disconnect them from their soul and intuition, then they won't rise up against the corrupt patriarchy at play. So there is also attack not just on men but women too. Okay, and we see with Trump Gaza ad that he put out, where you see the men and the belly dancers. That's go ahead and look a little bit deeper into that, where um, you know what that is actually doing is he's promoting the bacha bazi. That's what it is. And when you look into the depth of this will tie into how he's besties and a testy with yeah, Epstein, right? Because they're part of this sex trade, slave trade. They're part of promoting this agenda over young children, and it's just so corrupt. So again, I'll reiterate, Trump is tied to this warfare of sex slave, sex trade, having sex with children. And as you see in his Gaza ad promoting the Bachabazi, go look deeper into that. That is modern day warfare that we have become desensitized to, and many people don't even realize what that is. So we have in Australia the Stolen Generations, it's called, from 1910 to the 70s, where Aboriginal children were removed from their families forcibly as part of the assimilation policies based on eugenics ideas of breeding out the Black. Forced sterilization of women with disabilities, cases persisted into the 21st centuries with ongoing human rights concerns. In New Zealand, the Maori eugenics disclosure, while not as systemic as elsewhere, alleged, eugenics rhetoric was used historically to justify marginalization of the Maori people with proposals of reproductive system restrictions. So I'm seeing a trend. There's marginalized targets. Okay, so these eugenic programs primarily targeted Indigenous people, racial minorities, the disabled, and the poor. There's always some sort of medical justification. where a lot of these programs were framed as public health or population control measures. And this is where you see a lot of doctors today, especially in America, they're saying they're throwing the towel in. They're saying, this is a market. I can't even treat my patients the way I want to treat them because it's a market and it's all under control. Okay, so we're seeing more and more, like I said, of people leaving these noble positions, which ultimately lead to the robotics stepping in and doing it for the elite. It's cheaper and you don't have to fight the heart of man stepping up and saying, no, 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 human rights. I choose, equality. What's right is right. What morality. The robots, they don't have that. So there's a legacy all around the world of where survivors are still fighting for recognition and reparations. Okay. So I touched on eugenics, and I think that's the biggest means of modern day warfare that we, don't freak out. World War III, we've already been in it. So just find your peace in what you're going to do to reclaim your power in your mind and see things clearly and make choices about the foods we're eating, the beauty products we're using, and all of these chemical warfare um, so that influence our reproductive system. Okay. We see with the eugenics in America, it's controlled prenatal care. That's all part of it. Okay. So let's shift now into viruses and bacteria. These are very, very much well studied. Um, I said New Mexico, Los Alamos. And so I've always been very interested in my life to um, kind of understand this deeper. And so the universe has naturally brought me people that I can kind of begin to study in a sense. And what I'm finding is I'm having a data. I have I have data now where I'm seeing a trend of people enlisting into different forms of the military, the state of New Mexico, then just going to the state for whatever various reason, and then falling very ill with different diseases, specifically paralysis in some way. Um, Very, very interesting to me. Um, Happened to my grandparents. Just interest. That's where my it opened up this door. Is my grandparents, my grandfather on my maternal side went into, I believe, a Navy, and there was a trip to New Mexico, and then him and his wife fell very ill. Okay, and so the universe has brought me many very similar cases that I'm just observing, and again collecting data to say this is a lot of people that this has happened to. What's going on? And it's more recently brought me to Los Alamos, where there is indeed some of the best scientists in the world that study viruses and bacteria and how they pretty much from what I understand, they're obsessed with transmission and transmissionability. So my theory is that they've come up with things like a common cold. This is alleged, okay? This is a spirituality channel, okay? Go into your soul and you'll know if this is the truth in your soul. So I'm very interested to know how like something like a common cold can be manipulated. I think they study, and then how can something like something that will inflame the heart, brain, and gut be transmissible through sex, so through married partners. Because what else happens when you go in the military? What's if you know the culture? You get vaccinated, and all of a sudden you're married, right? So passing between couples, I think, is something that they study and experiment on through their soldiers, unfortunately, and it's why I speak out on this. So in the early 1900s to the 40s, we see the Spanish flu right after the start of World War One, right? So this was a virus, an H1N1 influenza A, and there were about estimated 50 to 100 million deaths worldwide. Okay. Then we have in 1910 to 11, so this is a little bit before that, we have this bacteria of the Manchurian pneumonia plague. And this was in northeast China, where estimated over 60,000 deaths. It spread through marmot hunting, okay, the deadliest pneumonic plague of the 20th century. Now we say, okay, well, this stuff exists naturally. Okay, but we also know that it's studied in labs, and we can't deny that. We can't deny that it's studied in labs, maybe to help us overcome it. but it's studied in labs for warfare, okay? Because it's silent warfare that we are, you know, it's dropped on us and spread through our families. That's silent. In 1918 to 22, we had the Russian typhus epidemic, which was a bacteria transmitted through lice, estimated 2 to 3 million deaths, Russia and Eastern Europe. In 1950s to 70s, we have the Asian flu with a virus, H2N1, impacting about 1 to 2 million deaths, spread through international travel. Now, when I was studying viruses at Texas Women's University, and I want to say 2016, that's what the scientists were predicting. That's what I had to study, is that there was going to be a huge pandemic, could be a coronavirus, but it was because of the increase of international travel. That's what they engraved in my mind. Okay, sounds good. And then we have in the 60s the Hong Kong flu, which was a virus, H3N2, with an estimated 1 to 4 million deaths. In the 60s to 70s, the Chlorella L Tora pandemic, which is a bacteria. Indonesia, millions affected, thousands dead, spread through Asia, Africa, Latin America, and was waterborne. Okay, so it's silent warfare. You know, going to a hospital is normalized. Who controls that, right? Military. You know, they give us the problem and then they give us the solution. That's how you have complete and control of the human, and that's modern day warfare that I'm here to tell you you don't have to subscribe to. You can see through it, you can rise above it, and your body is naturally regenerative by nature. When you tap into your consciousness in the human's body's regenerative nature, you really have success with self-healing. And that's what they don't want you to know. So a lot of people that speak like me will be deemed as conspiracy. They'll put onto the news this propaganda. I saw in like Australia, I want to say, where someone died, a daughter died because her mom was a conspiracy theorist saying that, you know, don't get chemo. And so these are very fine line, very sensitive nature stuff that we have to understand as part of an agenda to keep us in fear of our own ability to manage ourselves and our own health. Okay. In the 80s, this is huge. The HIV/AIDS pandemic, a virus. Okay. Over 40 million deaths worldwide. And this is where we get into conspiracy too. A lot of like leaked information claims they created the virus. They have the cure, you know. So I mean, here we go. And who did that target? Specifically Black people. And we saw it rise in the Black homosexual communities in America. Okay, this is very much so. I will claim here, you know, by design. The Legionnaire's disease outbreak in the 70s was a bacteria, impacted about 200 people, around 29 deaths. Bacteria in air conditioning systems. The Hanata virus in the 90s was a virus in southwest US affecting the Navajo Nation. Dozens infected, and it has a high fatality rate linked to rodent drop-ins. We get into the 2000s with the SARS virus in 02 to 04. This was SARS-CoV-1 coronavirus with about 8,000 cases, 700, almost 800 deaths reported. Human to human spread and a precursor to COVID-19. In 09, we see the swine flu, the virus, H1N1 influenza A, affected about 200,000 to 575,000 deaths globally, and the WHO declared this a pandemic affecting mostly young adults. We see in more recent years the Ebola epidemic in West Africa was a virus and with about 11,000 deaths, and it was a severe fever, high fatality rates with multiple smaller outbreaks. In the 2020s, we have the COVID-19 pandemic, which was a virus, SARS-CoV-2, and about 7 million confirmed deaths, but likely undercounted, billions affected. And it was the largest pandemic since the Spanish flu, includes lockdowns, social change, and vaccine campaigns. So since COVID, we've been so desensitized. It's not over. It's not over. We're still in a very dismantled state since this. So I'll say, I think World War III technically happened, and you know, we have what in the 1998 the U.S. embassy bombing in Kenya and Tanzania. Then in 20,000 the attack on the USS Cole. 2001 9/11. So maybe then, but significantly, I think we stepped into it in 2017. Okay, and so then this COVID-19 was the marker right after the start of this war. We have the monkeypox outbreak, which is a virus, thousands of cases worldwide, the chlorella resurgence, which is bacteria in Haiti, Lebanon, and Africa, tens of thousands of cases tied to natural disasters, poor sanitation, and instability. Okay. This is not limited to, same with eugenics, that the list I shared is not limited to just that list. Investigate yourself, you'll find a lot more. Same with the viruses and bacteria. This list is not limited, you'll find more. Okay. This is modern day warfare. So biological warfare also is like the parent company, you could say, because it is a company of chemical warfare. Okay. So I'm gonna give some examples of chemical warfare and weapons used since the early 1900s. Okay, so World War One, we'll go back to the early 1900s from 1914 to 18. In Western and Eastern Europe, the chemicals used were chlorine gas, phasogen, mustard gas. Nations involved were Germany, Britain, France, and Russia, with over 1 million casualties. This was the first modern large-scale use of chemical weapons in modern warfare, introduced by Germany. The Spanish-Moroccan War, 1921 to 27. The location was Spanish Morocco, which is in North Africa. Mustard gas was dropped by air by Spain, and the target was indigenous Berber rebels. First use of chemical weapons in colonial warfare. But what happened to when the colony came over to America? What happened then? So I do believe a lot of the viruses and bacteria, this isn't new, this type of warfare, although it's like more modernized and commercialized. But like the same thing happened throughout the world when the colonies showed up. These diseases they brought over and wiped out people. So remember, there are otherworldly beings inhabiting the human. They live here, they live in the earth. Okay, so there's always been this war over us, over our control. Don't be fooled that all of this is new. It's not. Mid 20th century, we have the second Ethiopian War in the 1930s. Ethiopia. Mustard gas was used by fascist Italy, the Mussolini regime. Okay. I'm looking up the name of this woman because in Italy, if you didn't know, I believe her name is Giorgia Meloni. She's the Prime Minister of Italy since 2002. She has a connection to Nazi Germany, if you didn't know. Um, so interestingly enough, this stuff is like still going on, right? The impact was thousands of civilian deaths used to suppress Ethiopian resistance. It was considered war crime under international law. And a lot of these bad guys, they just break the international war laws. We see Trump just did, okay, as we see Israel did. This is what they do. They don't care and they get away with it. World War II in the 1930s and 40s, chemical weapons not used in battlefield combat, but on a large scale. In Nazi Germany used Zyklon B, which is hydrogen cyanide, in gas chambers during the Holocaust, killing millions in death camps. Stockpiles existed on all sides, but mutual deterrence likely prevented battlefield use. Chemical weapons were reserved mostly for genocidal purposes, not open warfare. Post-World War II into the late 20th century, we have the Vietnam War in the 50s and 70s. A chemical agent used was Agent Orange, an herbicide containing dioxin. Now, dioxin, a lot of this is it can be, we can find high measures of this, I believe, in chickens um, that are feeding off of like that are in areas of like where there's the runoff, I believe, and a lot of the like AI um, plants and different plants that we have around America are polluting the air with dioxin. That many people are having lung issues and cancers from in these small rural communities. I know Tennessee is a big one. Just follow Elon Musk, okay? And they're speaking out against it. And of course, this is affecting poor communities, people of color, indigenous communities, and the chickens. And then people eat the eggs that have um, this chemical, and it leads to birth defects. Gas was used. There was a lot of other tactics with like using microwaves too. Not like a microwave. There's a really good Netflix movie that I think you guys should check out. It was produced by Barack Obama and Michelle Obama's company, Higher Grounds Productions. It's called Leave the World Behind, where they bring like into awareness this type of warfare that like communists could potentially bring out and use. So good. So go check that movie out. But you know, this is part of what modern day warfare unfortunately looks like. Tear gas was used by the United States. The long-term health effects affected over nearly and more than 3 million people with cancers and birth defects. And it also ruins our planet with deforestation. So, though not traditional chemical weapon, Agent Orange caused massive civilian and ecological damage. We have the North Yemen Civil War, where chemicals used were mustard gas and allegedly um, Fazogen by Egypt, and the target was royalist forces and civilians. Hundreds of casualties reported, and this is considered one of the first post World War II uses of chemical weapons in the Arab world. We see in the 80s the Iran-Iraq War. Chemical agents used were mustard gas, sarin, and tabian, which are nerve agents. So we notice this is on civilians. It's not, yes, there's like assassination attempts and assassinations of these world leaders, but a lot of the modern warfare is on everyday folk, civilians, innocent people that want peace, that want to just, you know, get to religion and go to the restaurants and eat and have family and friends and fun. It's like, just live. That's who this is used on. The user was Iraq, Saddam Hussein, and the targets were Iranian troops and Kurdish civilians. Tens of thousands of casualties and over 5,000 civilians killed in the Halabja chemical attack in the 80s. Okay. 21st century, we have the Syrian civil war where agents used were sarin, chlorine gas, and mustard gas. Primarily Syrian government forces claimed that this was against rebels in ISIS. In 2013, we have the Gotua Syrian gas used and hundreds killed. Can Shenhun in 2017, Syrian gas 80 plus killed. Duma in 2018, chlorine gas. So the UN and the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons confirmed uses in several cases. Post 2003 in Iraq, ISIS used chlorine and sulfur mustard gas during its occupation of the territory, targeting civilians, Kurdish fighters, and Iraqi troops. Okay, so then we also have assassination attacks with nerve agents. Kim Jong-nam in 2017 in Malaysia, the VX nerve agent used, the alleged perpetrator North Korea. Sergei Sirkapal and daughter in 2018, the United Kingdom. Novichok nerve agent by alleged perpetrator, the Russian intelligence operatives. So the Chemical Weapons Convention, the CWC, in 1993 was adopted in force since this 97. The goal is to ban the production, stockpiling, and use of chemical weapons. Okay, so most countries have joined, but let's be honest, who's really in control of that? And are these world leaders going to really abide by the law? Because they seem to want to enforce law, but be okay with breaking it themselves. So I want to take a switch here. Okay. Let's talk about shared corporate ownership and influence. This is where modern warfare is in every day. So the American food industry is deeply intertwined with the military industrial complex, though not always in an obvious and direct way. This relationship is built through shared corporate ownership, government contracts, policy influence, and technological crossovers. So let's break this down. How the food system, let's talk about America, is connected to the military industrial complex. So major conglomerates have dual interests. Many of the corporations dominating food production, processing, and distribution are also involved in defense, biotech, and chemical industries. So let's go to America's favorite brands. This is all over the grocery stores, modern day warfare. They call this like wartime food. Okay. General Mills and Nestle have worked on military rations and nutrition. Monsanto, now owned by Bayer, who makes medication, developed Agent Orange for the military and later genetically modified seeds for agriculture that our bodies can't like break down, that aren't giving us the nutrients and vitamins we need when we eat them. This is big. DuPont, Dow Chemical, BASF have histories in both agrochemicals and military weapons, explosives, NELPAM, and nerve agents. The same people making the Teflon pans that you cook your food on, that have forever chemicals that can never leave your body, that go into the water systems, that cause infertility, that cause cancer. The warfare is at home. The warfare is at school. We're going to get into the education system here soon. The warfare is in the hospitals. It's so every day that we don't even notice it. And then we see the wars that we see on the media and we freak out. Don't panic. Don't panic. Change your lifestyle. That's what we all have to do. We all have to stay educated and re-educate ourselves. So these corporations develop pesticides, synthetic fertilizers, and GMOs for agriculture. Huge revenue source for these elites. And it also will make people have to go to the hospital to get treated for cancers. And they profit off of that too. They also make these same chemicals, companies make chemical weapons, fuel, okay, and military tech in wartime. Their profits grow through both military contracts, agricultural dominance, and under the same parent shareholders, BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. Interestingly enough, let's talk about BlackRock. This is what Spirit has called me to share. This company, how, they're all for the border, putting this wall up at the Texas-Mexico border, but yet they want to do a pipeline from Texas to Mexico, which will impact many communities in the earth, okay? Drill, baby, drill. But keep people out. Keep people out of a country built on immigration, okay? This is what they do. There's a technological and scientific crossover between the agricultural technology origins and war tech. So nitrogen fertilizers were first developed for explosives in World War One. Pesticides like DDT were used in World War II to kill lice and malaria-carrying insects, then marketed for agriculture. Canned food and rehydrated rations were invented for troops and later commercialized for civilians. This mirrors how military innovation often becomes consumer products, more money for them. And it gets funded by government policies and subsidies. The U.S. agricultural policy benefits corporations over people. Let's talk about the USDA, the DoD, the FDA. Work closely with agriculture businesses to promote mass productions of soy, corn, and wheat used in processed foods and animal feeds. These crops also feed into biofuels and industrial products, not just foods. Military buys food in bulk. The US military is one of the largest institutional buyers of food, especially shelf-stable and ultra-processed foods. This is a big one because we're going to get into the education systems soon. Companies like Tyson, Cargill, and Nestle profit from military and prison food contracts. And this keeps food profitable, centralized, and industrialized. Okay. I'm gonna tie this into all these other systems in a second. So there is a psychological and population control link. Processed foods, it's studied, it's scientific, high in sugar, fat, and salt. Now, sugar isn't bad for you, salt's not bad for you, and fat's not bad for you. It's what's up is down these days. So they have this combination, which is actually very deadly and is proven to cause cognitive it to dull cognitive function, emotional regulation, and spiritual clarity. So some critics argue that this is intentional disempowerment of the system. This is modern day silent warfare. The same military corporate structures promoting war and surveillance are behind mass food production that contributes to obesity, illness, and dependence. So there is a prison, military, food, industrial triangle, and early children education is also in this, it's not a triangle anymore, it's a square. Okay, because the same companies feeding prisons are feeding the children in America at these schools. School lunches. Prisons also, this is big, prisons often force inmates to work in food production, the most gruesome type, like meat packaging, creating cheap labor for these corporations. Many food suppliers for schools, prison, and the military overlap. This system reinforces a cycle where black and brown bodies were policed, imprisoned, and used for economic gain through experimentation and modern day warfare by the same corporate powers profiting from war. Okay, so let's bring this together here. Monsanto and Bayer, involved in agriculture, biotech, and warfare, influence our seeds, GMOs, and Agent Orange. General Mills, involved in consumer food and defense rations, contracted for army food, and have food all over our grocery stores. Nestle, packaged water, horribly corrupt company, influence water rights, supplies military and prisons. You know, the whole war with fluoride, right? Tyson Foods, involved in meat and prison foods, contracts with institutions, Boeing, Raytheon, not food producers, but lobbying alongside agriculture businesses for subsidies, part of the same corporate ecosystem. BlackRock and Vanguard are asset managers to own stakes in most of the food and military companies. Okay, so all of this is going to tie into the warfare on the mind. When it comes to intuition, what's studied by the military, CIA, institutions is that when we go through a trauma, we become more intuitive. I recently saw a woman that has come out as she was part of a sex slave organization with the elite, and what they would do is they would train her as a spy, and one of the things they would do is they would inflict torture and pain because her intuition would increase every time. She'd become more sensitive, more intuitive. So um, there's a huge psychological and physiopsychological effect that maintains control over the people through the dimming of our light, the blocking of our endocrine system, the causing of us to be sick and have to go source out someone else to heal us. And again, it's an overlapping modern day warfare tool. So let's get into the beauty industry because we're not stopping with just what we eat and what we consume and water, and it just is everywhere. So don't freak out about World War III because we're already here. So the beauty and makeup industry is also deeply connected with the military industrial complex. And these corporate powers share structures in similar ways to the food industry, like shared chemicals, corporations, ownership, propaganda, and psychological control. So there's a shared chemical origin between war tech and beauty products, petrochemicals, heavy metals, and byproducts of warfare. So the most common ingredients in makeup and beauty products are synthetic dyes, silicones, parabens, and petroleum jelly. derived from petrochemicals, the same base material used in explosives, weapons, and plastics. There are babies being born with plastics in their blood these days. It's scientifically studied that when we menstruate, ladies, every month there's plastic in our blood that we bleed out. So imagine if we have the birth control and you're not bleeding out every month. It's a serious problem because the menstrual blood actually cleanses you. Talc, this is something that there's a lot of class action lawsuits on these days because a lot of this is used in like baby products. A lot of those companies that make baby foods are right up in here with the same company. So talc used in powders is usually contaminated with asbestos, which is used in military insulation. Lead, aluminum, and formaldehyde used in makeup, deodorants, and hair products are also industrial military products. So you could consider this wartime vanity, right? So the ingredients used in military and war infrastructure end up on the shelves as lipsticks, foundations. Industrial military companies pivoted to beauty for more forms of control over the people and more silent warfare over us all. Companies like DuPont, Dow, BASF, and 3M. 3M is responsible for PFSAs, the forever chemicals. DuPont made gunpowder, explosives, and Teflon, now used in cosmetic fillers, long wear makeup. Okay, so if you ever had like waterproof mascara, that has forever chemicals in it. Okay, just like a Teflon pan is waterproof. You want to stay away from all of that. You're putting that right on your eyes, your spiritual eyes, and you have headaches and migraines and tumors and all of this. I mean, it's everyday stuff that we almost like take for granted. You know, it's so like a false light. It's so difficult to really process that. It's like everywhere, this warfare that we've been in, then they linger us on the news that we're almost there, right? We're here. We're here. So BASF, chemical weapons used in World War II, now supplies cosmetic ingredients, including pigments and emulsifiers. Dow Chemical and Nelpan and Agent Orange later invested in personal care and skincare chemicals. These companies were built in World War I and II as weaponry and pivoted consumer products as peacetime profits. BlackRock and Vanguard, they're the top shareholders in beauty gains like L'Oreal, Estee Lauder, Johnson and Johnson, Procter and Gamble, and Unilever, and are all the same firms that own Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and Boeing. Aerospace. These firms influence public health through military lobbying and consumer manipulation. The same elite investors profit from weapons of destruction and illusions, instruments of illusion. A lot of these aerospace companies, like what I see is like certain beings can fly airplanes and crafts from the mind. There's a lot of portals up in the sky that aren't talked about, like stars, and all of that's very real, but like we have this NASA guys and aerospace guys of like how limited we are, supposedly. It goes so much deeper. Like the manipulation when it comes to aerospace is just insane. Psychological and social control, beauty standards is soft power. So just as military power controls through violence, the beauty industry also internalized control by promoting toxic beauty ideals, promoting whiteness, promoting youthness, thinness, being ageless, hyperfemininity. Okay. These standards distract from the self empowerment and sovereignty, the authenticity of the human, keeping people in cycles of consumption, comparison, and self doubt. Oh, she's skinny. I got to go get this treatment, that treatment, this treatment. And it keeps people in this battlefield of the body. So the war is on self worth, self esteem, disempowerment. In military use of beauty products like camouflage makeup, sunscreens, and skin protectants were originally developed for soldiers. Many of the modern day skincare products emerged from military dermatology research. Perfume companies historically made chemical compounds used for military. Here's key note, a lot of them developed as nerve gas derivatives. Propaganda and media controlling. This is Geopolitical as well. I mean, the beauty industry uses celebrity worship in Hollywood and advertising to push consumption, like military recruiting propaganda, and how they have surveillance in these high schools to try to recruit young adolescents into their regime. Okay, so both industries use fear, fear of enemies, and terror. It's what the military uses, and beauty uses fear of aging and not being desirable and being judged. And this exploits women and resources. So just like the military conflict extracts resources from Earth, what is China doing? They're on the far side of the moon right now doing what? Mining. What does Elon want to do with Mars? Mine. Okay. The beauty industry exploits labor, child labor, mica mining by children in India and Africa, natural minerals, materials like palm oil and rare minerals, women's insecurities they profit off of. So it's all tied into, if you notice, I keep bringing this back to the children. I keep going back to being in the mother's womb is when this starts. The war, the silent war. Women are often targets and tools for these industries, sold the problem and the toxic solution. It's just like what religion does and all of this. Who controls a lot of this? The Vatican, okay, with the beautiful guise of this peaceful Pope. Then underneath the Vatican, there are a lot of truths, a lot of ancient texts that we're not able to see, a lot of research, a lot of data that could help to empower us and free us away from these religious structures that keep us compliant and blindly obedient to this war. The Vatican is just as responsible. And education's, the religious systems off where I was at with that is repress women. Often, most religions repress women, okay, and keep us, the matriarch of the family, not as powerful as she could be and she should be to heal and help her family and guide her family, being more right-brained and intuitive. So biohacking and transhumanism, the next phase. The military is increasingly overlapping biotech, neural interfaces, and aesthetic enhancement tech. The beauty industry is already aligning with injectables, anti-aging tech, DNA-based skincare, digital beauty filters tied to surveillance capitalism. So in the UN, they have like certain refugees where they're scanning their iris in order for them to have like a digital ID, which will give them then their digital currency. So we're transitioning our economic system into more of a system that is also controlled through surveillance and digital assets. And if you don't have the digital ID, well, you can't drive. If you don't have the digital ID, you can't get credit. You know, like we see with certain countries when they have social status for their credit. And it's just, it's all warfare. It's all warfare. So the military tech beauty trifecta um, will attempt to define human future through modification and control. So again, a lot of these chemicals are petrochemicals and toxins, skincare dyes, and there's a psychological impact of body shaming and fear-based obedience controlled through force and affects our nervous system and endocrine system. So forever chemicals are one of the clearest bridges between the military industrial complex and the food industry and the beauty industry. So these toxic, persistent substances embody the chemical legacies of war that have infiltrated nearly every corner of modern life, from our mascara to our microwave popcorn to the rainwater we drink. Forever chemicals are nicknamed PFAS, okay, a group of over 12,000 human-made chemicals known for their extreme persistence in nature and the body. Okay, so toxicity can happen at very low levels, and there's a huge widespread use in nonstick pans and cookware, waterproof, heat-resistant, grease-repellent products. Okay, so the origins are tied to the military-industrial complex. PFAS were first developed in the 40s by 3M and DuPont, used in military firefighting foams and airplane weapon coating. The Department of the Defense is now one of the largest polluters of PFAS in the United States. Supplies in the country, which is just an abomination to me. People sacrificing their lives. okay, are subjected to these type of communities. The military created the demand infrastructure for PFAS, and there's no accountability. So there's a lot of these farmers these days that are being shut down by government agencies, that a lot of their cows have PFAS in them, and um, it's all these like these silent wars popping up with farmers in America and people in rural communities going to courts. And this guy in the White House, he's got all these judges in places of power so that they can continue on this destructive warfare and get away with it. Okay. PFAS are also found in food wrappers if you go to like fast foods or the microwave popcorn bags or pizza boxes, food process food processing equipment. And these chemicals leach into the food and bioaccumulate in our bodies, causing PFAS are linked to cancer, hormone disruption, infertility, immune system suppression, and developmental issues in children. The chemicals developed for firepower are now in our food wrappers and cookware, compromising health for convenience. This is modern day warfare. PFAS are also in smudge-proof, water-resistant, and long-wearing makeup like lipstick, foundation, and concealers. And in 2021, allegedly, there's a study that found over half of the U.S. cosmetics tested are often off-labeled, but it's found in over half of them. So you're told that you need this waterproof mascara, but in return, you're exposed to chemicals and toxins that last longer than your lifetime. And there's a regulatory failure and corporate cover-ups. This is what I want you to investigate in the news, like the smaller town news is, or 3M and DuPont for decades that you knew they were toxic, but they hid the evidence. Military and industrial lobbyists delayed bans and regulations. So a lot of these people in Congress know all of this and they get their ways to keep it all going so they can profit. Okay, so it's just no PFAS are required to be labeled in our food or beauty products. So there's a deep culture of secrecy, collusion, and profit that ties to regulatory systems and these very corporations and government bodies creating the problem, the warfare. It's controlled through poison, and it's from a spiritual perspective. PFAS disrupt hormonal and nervous system imbalances, which directly affects your intuition, your reproduction, your mental clarity, your immune resilience. All of this is very, very, very spiritual. So it's a widespread presence of systemic war on the human body and consciousness, which aligns with the propaganda of disempowerment, making us sick, foggy, dependent, and compliant. Now, there's also an intergenerational damage because PFAS are passed from the mother to the child through the womb and breast milk. They bioaccumulate, meaning that your great grandmother's exposures still live in your bloodstream. They contaminate the soil, water, and air, and even rainfall. So, planetary poisoning parallels colonialism and militarism. So what can you do? Avoid these cosmetics and cookware labeled waterproof, nonstick, or stain resistant. Filter your water with a high quality PFAS filter. Support bans of PFAS movements and detox spiritually and physically from the systemic toxicity. Big one. Practice discernment in both what you put in your body and what you put on your body and in your body. So this is one where the trickery goes deep because the American education system is not exempt from the influence of the military, industrial, food, beauty, chemical complex. In fact, it's a core mechanism for perpetuating the systems of control, consumption, and compliance starting from early childhood. So there is definitely programming over education. I would consider this modern day warfare. The curriculum is controlled. Textbooks in schools, their standards are shaped by political interests and corporate donors. What does Trump want to do? He wants to have the Trump Bible in these kids' schools and wants to have erase African American history and Indigenous Native American history from our children's education books, okay? And meanwhile, critical thinking, holistic health, spiritual development, emotional intelligence are largely absent, which is what's needed for our society to be authentic, original, and prosperous, powerful. So history's sanitized, erased, war crimes, indigenous genocide, the origins of the food chemical industries and corporates are completely distorted or not incorporated. So this is, we see warfare as education becomes indoctrination, not empowerment. This is the saddest part to me. Um, School food, the chemical Trojan horse. Who supplies school lunches? Massive contracts with agricultural businesses and processed food giants like Kraft, Pepsi Cola, and Tyson. These meals are often made with ultra-processed food full of refined sugars, PFAS-lined packaging, hormone-laced dairy and meat, synthetic additives, and dyes. Children are fed the same chemical agents that disrupt hormones, attention, and immunity, keeping them docile, sick, and dependent. And the result of this, we've seen an increase in childhood cancers, ADHD, autism, obesity, diabetes, behavioral disorders. And then what do these schools do? They push medication like Ritalin over nutrition, over mindfulness, conscious healing. I remember reading a teacher somewhere in the north, and I was reading that the air where she was working was polluted. And she explained she was in an inner city school of early education. This is rampant. So many people are living in homes with toxic chemicals in the HAV systems and the paints and the plastics in the homes, and these children are breathing in these PFAS and lead and mold. Okay, especially in lower income and minority communities. Plastic flooring, synthetic turf, flame retardant furniture, often off gas toxins that affect development and focus. School beauty products and cheerleading and hygiene programs often contain phthalates and parabens. Children sit in chemically saturated foods, breathing in and absorbing neurotoxins all day long. These schools were created for little boys, little soldiers, to sit still and be obedient. Um, Women's tampons and pads and menstruation products that we give to little girls are loaded with, chemicals that cause infertility and cancers. So you want to make sure you're choosing more plant derivative household chemicals, beauty products, especially for young girls when they get their periods, and potentially considering different forms of schooling your children so that they don't have to go and be subjected to sitting still in these places all day that are very similarly fed like prisons and designed like prisons. There's this huge military has their hands on recruitment. It's like ROTC and all of that. And Pentagon has access to high school student data for recruitment. Programs are often glamorized and often in low income schools where there's not many other options for children. Schools are bribed with funding, technology, and sports facilities to promote enlistment. So the military becomes a path out of poverty and continuing cycles of trauma, obedience, and service to the elite empire. And there's also this beauty standard, as they're all interconnected, that's pushed on early education for the start of consumerism. Okay, so young girls are pressured, gender is pressured, beauty standards are taught through peer culture, social media, social marketing, cosmetic use, dieting, body shaming. All of this begins in early education, and it's an attack and a war on self-esteem, self-worth, body autonomy, and media literacy. Okay, so these school events often reinforce looks over intelligence or creativity. And so a lot of these children are actually groomed into a consumption-based identity driven by the very industries promoting and profiting from their insecurities. So STEM education is often highly funded by tech, military, and pharma corporations like Pfizer, Raytheon, and Lockheed Martin. Focus on producing workers, the slave race, versus awakening innovators. I think of like Terrence Howard and how he's got all of these patents and he's saying, geometry and mathematics, all of it's not right. and he can't even get peer reviewed because they don't consider him, at that level, because he doesn't have the education. And I saw this one interview where it was like someone from NASA was like, I don't like this because what it does is it suppresses the voice of like inventors and innovators. You can't hear of them unless you comply to these education systems. Well, a lot of geniuses, they can't comply to the education systems because they can't submit to something that's false. They don't make it, and they're college dropouts. And so, although they can bring amazing innovations to society, a lot of them won't get the recognition because they don't have the academics. Okay, a lot of academics and left brain logical people, they can't get into faith-based healing. They never can because they're too logical. Some of the academics I've worked with, I can't because it's just like they're not going to heal themselves. They're going to keep looking for these logical means of healing and never be able to actually do what it takes to bring that change. So, you know, STEM is a tool to train compliant, technically skilled laborers for the elite systems. And you've heard me say, throughout this and in my other video about what I predict for this field and what you want to do if you're in it. So public schools are chronically underfunded, okay? And they offer solutions by the same corporations that create the crisis. That is modern day warfare. We saw that with Trump and the TikTok. He said, we got to ban TikTok. We got to ban TikTok. And then he gets into power again. I'll bring back TikTok. I'll save it, so that's modern day warfare. And education's become a business model, not a human right. And that's really unfortunate. Now, I believe in homeschooling, but I understand that I'm not the only person on this planet to where public education actually works for families. It helps families to succeed. It helps to educate children. It helps to give them food to eat. It helps to give them a safe place to be and have break from a really turbulent home life. And it doesn't need to be this business model. It should, I believe, be fundamentally a human right to having free education, free healthcare. It's unbelievable without the push of a religion, having these crosses everywhere, the Ten Commandments everywhere. It's just bizarre. Disregarding anyone else's God, disregarding anyone else's beliefs, one way or the highway, is so narrow-minded. Stop subscribing to this. And there is a huge spiritual and energetic impact when children are conditioned to be obedient over sovereign, reward seeking over intuitive, disconnected from nature and spirit. Okay, punishing, spirit saying right now. We're trained to be a very punishing society. Eye for an eye. And the third eye, which is the seat of intuition and discernment, is dimmed by all of the fluorine in the water, the processed food, the trauma and the stress that we're constantly scrolling and exposed to, the lack of promoting creativity or mystical learning, which we naturally have an inclination to. If you think of humans, how obsessed they are with religion and spirituality, it's like we live for it. Okay, so it's part of us. Our soul yearns for mystical understanding because we are mystics. So the entire elite structure dulls consciousness and prepares the youth for poverty, survival mode, slavery-like mindset, cult-like obedience, and not soul growth, not soul growth. I think a good solution may be more and more community-based education like homeschooling pods, alternative schools focused on wellness and consciousness. I believe in promoting more activism for curriculum control, not from the systems, but from parents and people. A push for food literacy, how to cook, how to eat, how to take care of yourself, how to heal yourself through food, mindfulness, how to meditate, how to seek answers from within, media education, and let's say the big one, decolonize history. Give us our history back. And I think they should detox these environments, like replace the cafeterias, the foods that they're offering, removing certain toxic cleaning agents in schools, and kind of introduce nature-based learning as well as support spiritual growth for the youth, because this helps people to be able to self-regulate and emotionally regulate and regulate their nervous systems, which will produce a more empowered society that doesn't choose crime, that chooses unity over separation, that chooses cooperation and community over divisiveness. I think that the youth should have opportunity to energy hygiene, okay? How to get grounded, cleanse, shield, all of that. Ancestral practices should be allowed. Emotional development should be um, taught. So now we'll get into, the Vatican. This is a powerful, interconnected system. So the Vatican and the institutional form of Christianity, especially shaped by the Roman Catholic Church, has a huge global impact and have played a deep, multi-layered role in the establishment, normalization, and spiritual masking of the very control systems we've been discussing: the military industrial food beauty chemical complex, and the psychological conditioning through education. The Vatican is a major political and financial power, if you didn't know. Though seen as a religious institution, the Vatican functions as sovereign nation state with a centralized bank, investments, and secretive finances. They have a history of alliances with empires, corporations, and monarchies, and involvement in global policy through diplomacy, UN influence, and banking systems. The Vatican owns and shares in global corporations, including pharmaceutical, arms, trade, oil, media sectors. And they have historically, throughout time, profited from colonial exploitation, the transatlantic slave trade, and indigenous land theft. So the Vatican plays a moral gatekeeper and economic stakehold in the systems that poison, pacify, and profit off of humanity. So Christianity plays a huge role in colonizing and mental control, saving souls as a tool for conquest. Okay, have you ever met a missionary? Excuse me, ma'am, do you know who Jesus Christ is? Like, Jesus is standing right here. You can't see that because you aren't really connected. um, so it's been, this whole religion is another modern day warfare tool. It's one of the most, what's up is down and down is up, um, pieces of warfare that I could see. It justifies colonial invasions, wars. I mean, look what's going on in the Middle East. I mean, this is unbelievable. It destroys indigenous spirituality. It replaces ancestral wisdom with obedience to the church state. Okay. So the doctrine of discovery, the 1493 papal decree gave Christian colonizers the right to claim land not ruled by Christians, laying the groundwork for modern Western imperialism. The Vatican is responsible for promoting this heaven-hell binary, the origin of sin and savior complexes that made people externally dependent on salvation, discouraged personal spiritual authority, intuition, and energy work, and communion with nature. Christianity has become a mental matrix, teaching people to submit, suffer, and obey, aligning perfectly with what needs to happen for the empire, the industry, and profit. I was given this prophecy that we'll see more and more very religious people go very, very dark and mentally ill. You will see this, creating more hell on earth, creating more pain. The truth is, you create your heaven and you create hell. You have that power. You've created everything that is. You've created all of this. You've helped to create it all. We all have. We're all aspects of creators. I think another warfare I touched on already is the inversion of the divine feminine, the suppression of the divine feminine. So Christianity demonizes the body, sexuality, feminine power, and earth-based traditions. So the Vatican and Christianity were behind not just the colonization, but a lot of the witch hunts, which are women hunts, and were directly targeting women, healers, midwives, indigenous leaders and healers, and mystics, which destroyed ancient knowledge of herbal medicine, energetic healing, and sovereignty. And the church replaced this divine interconnection with hierarchy, patriarchy, dogma, where only God can interpret God. Or only men can interpret God. Only men. Only the priest, not the priestess. Okay? Go to the Pope. Where's the female Pope? She doesn't exist. So this suppression is one of the biggest warfares of the third eye, the heart wisdom, and direct relationship with source within you. So we overcome that by understanding, again, just like what I said, source is within you. You are an aspect of the divine creator or creators. Okay? Understand who you are spiritually at soul level. Understand the power of your body and the spiritual connection. That's how we win the war. That's how we win. That's how we take back our power. We stop feeding all of this through reacting emotionally. The emotional reactivity is what they feed on and they build from and they harvest. You have to be an activist at this time. You have to stand out. You have to speak out. You have to say your truth. You have to walk in your authenticity. You have to. That's how we win ourselves out of this war. I touched on this, that the Vatican has suppressed hidden knowledge. The Vatican holds the largest private archive of ancient texts in the world, including pre-Christian mysticism, indigenous knowledge, astrology, sacred geometry, and divine feminine codes. And all of this was kept hidden, hoarded for their own gain instead of spread to help empower and uplift people in truth to knowing that they're powerful. So it's the Vatican is a gatekeeper, ensuring the masses will never wake up to their full power. And so that way these elites can do their little shenanigans. And the Vatican today still influences population control, sexual education, and reproductive rights. So they enforce all of this compliance and they're collaborating with the Carnegies and the Rothschilds and, all of this small percent of white men that are a lot like Trump, a lot like Trump. And we're seeing where this is leading us. I think a lot of people are waking up again. This more recent presidency, so the last time he got into power, people said they turned, they switched. We saw a huge mass of that in Florida. Republicans finally, like, they say something ain't right here, can't subscribe to this. Good for them. Unfortunately, people hung on to, for one, I think Kamala by votes should have won. I think that it was rigged. But as we've seen data come out about a lot of votes being thrown away, a lot of specifically younger populations, which tend to vote Democratic, were thrown away, tossed out. People of color's votes were tossed out, which many would have been voting more Democratic. And so it's it's really unfortunate to just steal and take and to break the law and want to punish those that aren't following the law and twisting the law and rewriting the law to go with what they want and their agendas. This is modern day warfare. So we're all reacting very differently since, let's say, the 1900s. Most of us weren't alive then. Since 2017, I think a lot of people drop a comment, share your thoughts here, put a prayer request on my comments to subscribe, support my channel. Thank you so much. But all of us are reacting very differently. A lot of this modern day warfare, World War III, we're seeing a mass amount of deaths, souls leaving the planet, some for good, not choosing to reincarnate. Many people have gone through periods of grief. I know a lot of people have been exhausted, fallen ill, bankrupt, lost homes for money issues, but also natural disasters are huge. Um, this is what modern day warfare looks like. So if you haven't been feeling good, that's why. And we want to be very grateful, if you're in America or certain countries where there's not bombs being dropped or drones all over us. Yet, we want to be very grateful. for what we have, that the warfare is, in a sense, more silent, but it's still deadly. It's still deadly. So I don't think it should be undermined or underlooked. So I share all of this as a form of awakening, as a form of sharing awareness. If you didn't know, I studied biology in school. I'm very much so interested in biological warfare. I studied virology in undergrad. Um, Briefly and right before this more recent pandemic. So I have a very strong interest, as I've shared in this. My grandparents both had MS. I don't think I shared that, but I shared their story of it and how it is interesting to me. And as a medical intuitive, I'm observing. Um, all of this, I think, is important to talk about because it helps us to take our power back and see through the chaos. If we can know all of this and see it for what it is, like, aha, we've been in this, I'm not going to be a victim to it anymore. This is where the Christ consciousness comes in, where we become more empowered to say, I'm going to make a different choice with my foods. I'm going to make a different choice with the household chemicals, the beauty products I use, how I build my home will be more sustainable. I'm going to be more aware of not just my own energy field, but how it impacts the greater whole, how it impacts the environment, and how it impacts animals. I'm going to pray more consciously, not tied to a religious system, but from a place of empowerment, visualization, feeling, and emotion into the field to make this world a more peaceful, cooperative world. It's so beautiful here, but it also is a place where we can create health. And that's what warfare is suffering, torture, pain, okay, genocide, taking away of our ability to reproduce ourselves and leave legacies through our children. That's modern day warfare. So you can do something about it and you should. And it all comes down to your choice, which is what Christ consciousness is all about. So I'll wrap this up by saying that I think another aspect of more modern day warfare is what I've been told to share, surveillance. So how drop a comment. Have you been just flooded with robocallers lately? And they have cameras on every block, and I think the drones were watching. They're introducing more of a surveillance of the drones. We're really stimulated, desensitized to that now. We forgot that that just happened, which is bizarre. The technology used, the robotics, all of this is what warfare looks like today. Everything that the media says, the politics, the confusion, the bait and switch. Um, it's turning people against one another. It's turning states within a country against each other. It's all leading to us feeling disempowered. I know that when I watch immigrants being detained. I'm African American, I'm Italian American. My family and my black side was brought here into slavery. On my white side, immigrated on a boat here not many generations ago. Like most, if not all, most. I do have Native American blood, but this country is an immigrant nation, okay? So when we begin to stop that, the very fundamentals of what this place representing freedom is, we're completely contradicting it. And so when I see immigrants being taken out of the country, women crying, fathers, these so-called police and immigrant enforcement, some of them are the KKK, allegedly. Some of them are, because the KKK funds Trump, loves Trump. They've come out publicly, these federally registered racist groups, hate groups like the KKK, okay? The white supremacists, they've come out publicly that Trump's agendas align with theirs. So they fund him. Okay, and the good old boys and all that. They got these masks on. You can't see who's punching and beating up these innocent people. A lot of the people they're detaining are Americans. Okay, so I feel one of the prophecies I've received, this is the day where even white man should be concerned. Yeah, I said it. Even the white man should be concerned because if he's gay, he should be concerned. If he's not Christian, he should be concerned if he's not for Trump. Okay, so all of us, don't think for 1 second that can't be us because they are breaking the law. It is not fair what they're doing. And it can happen to person, any person. Of course, specifically aiming towards people of color. More often, we don't see Melania Trump getting in handcuffs and deported. We don't see immigrants that, may have speak a foreign language tied to European countries here being dragged out, sent home. Not happening, but it will. It will. It will in this time. So I would say to that, if you believe in voting and doing all of this and who you're supporting politically, this might be a wake-up call for you to begin to think about not just yourself, but other people, because don't take for granted freedom and human rights. It's a privilege. And we're on the very brink of losing that for all people to a supreme power. Because if you didn't know, Trump loves Kim Jong-un. He wants this to be like that, where there's the military parades and the songs about him. That's what he wants, and I'll hail him. And please, this is a video to say, please reconsider your support for people that are really causing a lot of pain to other people and suffering. We don't need to feed that anymore. It's destructive. There will be an effect negatively. And I think that it's time for us again, I'll say this again, to keep putting into the field more unity. Just because Joe Schmo down the road doesn't believe the same thing that you believe, doesn't mean you need to come with an anarchy to stop him. Why don't you go back to where your country comes from, your family comes from? Because this place, America, is supposed to be about diversity after it was robbed and stolen. Okay? It's supposed to be about freedom of diversity. And if that bothers you, the celebration of someone that thinks differently, you're the problem. You're part of the problem. Okay, so awakening is painful because um, we realize, we look in the mirror, we see ourselves, the shadow and all. Okay, so develop your intuitive power at this time. Understand discernment. Understand and tap into your divine human superpowers to heal yourself, to pray more effectively and efficiently, to realize and understand what you need to do with your soul's mission. Decolonize your mind, your spirituality, your education, the way you think and your belief systems. Religiously deconstruct, okay? Because a lot of that religion, blind obedience, and saying my religion is the way, is opening up people to a mass amount of spiritual attachments and possessions. Yes, I'm busy. I'm busy. I'm busy. Now, ditch the victim mindset, okay? And choose the Christ consciousness, which is about you saving you, which is like symbolic of the Kundalini rising. Okay. Look into all of that for yourselves. And a lot of people say, I don't know what's real. I don't know what to believe. Well, that's because you're turned off right here. You're walking around like this. Move, wake up, open this up, and then you see clearer. Okay. And even then, truths exist at different levels. It's supposed to be that way. It's supposed to be this diverse consciousness is here, not just one shoe fits all. Get into proper diet and nutrition, maybe looking into more homegrown things, foods, um, less plastics. It's so hard because plastics are in our clothes too, and those seep into our skin. So getting more like sustainable and ethically sourced clothes. And people say, oh, this is too much. Well, having cancer is too much, I'm sure. So it's like we've fallen from like prioritizing ourselves first, our health first, our mind, our spirit first. We think it's like an expense, like it's a greater expense than like getting sick. And often with the human race, we go in these directions before it's too late, and then we have to we I don't like the word consequence, but like we feel a negative reaction or effect from it by law of the universe of cause and effect. Because fundamentally, the number one law I see of this universe is love. And so when we aren't taking care of ourselves, we're not really loving ourselves. And that is when we have one soul not loving themselves, and then another many, many, many. We have the whole collective consciousness in this disempowered, loveless state. And here we are. Care about your individual contribution. Don't feed the lower vibration. Plan intuitively, not in fear, and rest and unplug from a lot of the things that we're watching and scrolling on. Okay? Promote and put out high vibrational content. Be of service when you can. And I want to say it, and I said it over and over, pray for those that are locked up falsely. Pray for those that are subject to actual violent war of bombings and shootings and chemical and biological warfare. Okay, so I lift everybody up in this, and I want to hear from you. Please like and subscribe and tell me your thoughts.